So this is very exciting that we've got Dr. Jane Donegan here. Very exciting. Exclusive interview for Periscope. We are vaccine autism mothers. So, okay, tell everybody what kind of a doctor you are.
Okay, so I'm a GP, I'm a family doctor, and I work in the NHS in the National Health Service, and I'm a private doctor as well in London.
Okay, and talk to us about how you even got into the vaccine.
Well, like all my colleagues, I went to medical school, and we were taught that there were all these diseases that people used to die from, that stopped dying from them because of vaccines. And at the same time, we were told that there were all these other diseases that people stopped dying from, and that was because of clean water and sewage systems and so on. And medical students are supposed to be a bit clever, so you think that maybe we would ask the question, well, if all these people stopped dying from diseases because of better hygiene, maybe these other ones did too. But on the medical school curriculum, there's just so much there. You just learn these are vaccine preventable, and these are hygiene preventable. And so I went through medical school, I did postgraduate qualifications in obstetrics, orthopedics, paediatrics and so on. And when I was doing community paediatrics, I actually used to counsel the ghastly parents, as we thought of them, in the 80s who were worried about the whooping cough vaccine, because in those days that was regarded as the problematic vaccine. And I believed, along with almost all of my colleagues, that if you didn't vaccinate your children, you were ignorant. And if you weren't ignorant, then you were sociopathic, because otherwise why would you deny what we were told was a life-saving intervention from your own children and put everybody else at risk. So this carried on until I had my own children born. I actually started studying homeopathy then, and you would think that starting to study homeopathy I might have questioned vaccination, but I didn't. I couldn't understand why some holistic doctors didn't like vaccination, particularly homeopaths, because to me it seemed like the same thing. You know, you give this minute dose of something and you sort of become immune. So my children were born in 91 and 93, and I wouldn't say I unthinkingly vaccinated them. I vaccinated them because I knew that was the best thing to do. And so strong was my belief in vaccination that I even allowed them to inject my elder daughter with an out-of-date BCG vaccine. I automatically scanned vials, and I saw that this was out of date, and I said, but it's out of date. And she said, the doctor said, oh yes, that's why the clinic was delayed, but it's okay. My daughter had a horrendous reaction to it, but I still carried on with the rest, because that's what you did. So what happened? Well, in 1994, we had a measles rubella campaign, in which we vaccinated 7 million school children against measles and rubella. And we were told there was an epidemic coming. There was never any published evidence as to why this epidemic was coming, but we were told it was, so we sort of assumed it was across the sea or something, from maybe America. It seems in latter years that it was based on a computer algorithm that worked out there would be one. But what they said was, when this measles epidemic comes, everyone who's had one measles vaccine will not necessarily be protected. So I thought, well, this is fine, you know, because when I talked to the parents in the 80s about the whooping cough vaccine, I wasn't one of those doctors who said, you know, they're completely safe and effective. I was always a realistic doctor. I'd read the data sheets and I'd say, look, there are adverse reactions associated with the vaccine, but we're told it's 10 times less likely to happen from the vaccine than it is from the disease. So any intelligent person would give the vaccine. So now they were saying one dose of the vaccine wouldn't necessarily protect you when the epidemic came. And I thought, well, that's okay, because nothing's 100%. What worried me was when they said if you'd had 2 doses of a measles-containing vaccine, when the epidemic came, you wouldn't necessarily be protected. Now, lots of people nowadays might say, well, obviously you need at least 2 anyway, because we have 2 in the schedule. But when the measles vaccine was introduced in 1968 in this country, we were told 1 shot for life. It's just like having the real disease. So I thought to myself, well, actually, so they're saying you have to have 2 shots of this 1-shot vaccine with all the adverse reactions that may be associated with it, which I don't know what they are, the Department of Health doesn't know what they are, the Centres for Disease Control doesn't know what they are, because ever since we've started giving vaccination, there's been no open, honest way, actually, of reporting vaccine adverse reactions. Had we been doing it from those days, we would be able to see patterns, and we could say this is associated, this isn't. But so nobody knows what the adverse reactions are. So you can have them from the vaccine, and whatever we consider the adverse reactions from the disease. So suddenly the equation didn't look so good. The other thing that worried me was they said, anyway, the best way to vaccinate is en masse, because then you break the chain of transmission. So I thought, so why do we vaccinate all these 2 and 3 and 4-month-old babies? Why don't we just wait 2 or 3 years and then vaccinate everyone who's been born or moved into the country? So I started thinking, and I can't tell you how difficult it is to start thinking something that's different from what you've always been taught. I had, because of looking into homeopathy, read books and articles that said things like, everyone stopped dying before the vaccinations were introduced. But, these were people who, they were from another country, or they weren't medically qualified. And it's very difficult when you're trying to do something that's different to what you were taught at medical school. So I went to St Mary's Hospital in London, medical school, and I had top London professors at a top London medical school, and I thought, they all told me these things stopped people dying. I need to not read these books from these people who might be homeopaths or chiropractors or naturopaths. I need to get some proper data. So I called up the Office for National Statistics and I said, hello, could you please give me the graphs of deaths from all the diseases against which we vaccinate, since the 19th century. So they said, well, we got them from the 1940s. And I said, yes, I know, I've got them from the 1940s. They're in the Green Book, the vaccination against infectious diseases book from the Department of Health. I said, no, from before that. They said, well, we've got them for smallpox and tuberculosis, but not the rest. Try the Department of Health. So I rang them up. They said the same thing, apart from they said, try the Office for National Statistics. So I thought, well, this is really ridiculous. And I rang them up again and I said, look, you must have the data. And they said, oh yeah, we have the data. It's in the books on the shelves. So I said, okay, can I come in and get the data out? They said, yes. So I went in with my, by then, 4 and 6-year-old children with, paper and pencils and crayons and stuff. And I pulled out all the Motley books from 1837 until 1899. And then thankfully there was a really expensive, user-unfriendly CD-ROM that you could take home and at least try and analyse the data there. So I did. And I started making graphs. And the graphs I made, I can't show them to you here because they're not here, but the one for whooping cough, about 99% of the people who used to die from whooping cough had stopped dying before the vaccine was introduced. And it's similar for measles. And if you look at under 15-year-olds, which I haven't done on my graphs, but I used the data from Professor Thomas McEwen, who was emeritus professor of social medicine at Birmingham and a former chairman of health research strategy committees for the World Health Organization. So he wasn't a sort of holistic alternative practitioner. You can see that the rates for under 15-year-olds plummeted. So I started asking big questions. Now, originally, I was never worried about adverse reactions. What I was terrified about was, my children are going to die. If the vaccines don't protect them, they're going to die. And one of the things I say to people is, if you go and talk to your GP or health visitor or your practice nurse and you come away feeling scared, that's because that is how they are feeling about your vaccination choices. And people would say things like, well, all you need is health. And I used to say, health? No, I want something real. I want a homeopathic vaccine or a naturopathic vaccine or a chiropractic vaccine. That's how scared I was. I realised many years later that what you need is health. So that's why I started questioning vaccination, which is, with all the research I've done, has probably made my views on vaccination, I would say, probably about 180 degrees different from what they were. Because of my research, I was approached by 2 mothers who had been taken to court by the absent fathers of their children who weren't vaccinated, and the fathers wanted an order to be made for forced vaccination. They had been told by the Legal Aid Board that they wouldn't pay for an expert for them because there would be no expert that would support or give information about their views. And the judge, to give him his credit, said no, they have to have an expert, go and find one and then pay for it. So the Legal Aid Board wanted a doctor. So they found doctors not in the UK, but the Legal Aid Board wanted a UK doctor. So they found people in the UK who weren't doctors, but they wouldn't have them. So they found me. Now, I am an expert in vaccination, but I'm not an expert at being examined by a hostile barrister, so that was a different kettle of fish altogether. But when I first took on the case, and I looked at it, I looked at the reports by the other 2 experts, one for the fathers and one for the children, because they were below the age of 16. And basically, they were just a few pages long saying, the diseases kill you, the vaccines are safe and effective, they need all of them, and no references. So I thought, how can I make a judge sort of realise that to have an idea of not vaccinating your children is not an unreasonable thing to do? So I thought, I know what I do, I need to tell a story, because that's what human beings understand. So I told the story of each disease against which we vaccinate, what the disease is, what it does, how you treat it, what was happening to the disease before the vaccines were introduced, what was happening after the vaccines were introduced, what the manufacturers say are the adverse reactions, because there are adverse reactions. The manufacturers note them on the summary of product characteristics, so that when they happen they can say, well, you knew, because that's where they are. And also what I thought would be the chances of a child who was fairly healthy at doing if they came in contact with that disease organism. So I did that, and I fully referenced it, and we went to court, and as I said, I wasn't an expert at being examined by a hostile barrister. Even simple things like, I didn't know if they said, say yes or no, that I could say, no, it's not possible to say that. Anyway, so at the end of their case, the mothers lost. The judge in the case actually, he praised my, what he calls sometimes disarming honesty. I don't know what he meant by that, because what else would you be apart from honest? So anyway, the case went to appeal, and the appeal judges called my evidence junk science. So on the basis of that, which the mothers also lost, the General Medical Council that licenses UK doctors accused me of serious professional misconduct. Nobody ever complained. In fact, the name of the complainant was newspaper clipping. And thankfully I pay my defence premiums. So I went to my defence organisation, and they thought I was a bit batty, you know, because who wouldn't be batty if they were saying that there was a case for not vaccinating. And it must be said that my case was not actually not vaccinating. My case was, there are other ways of achieving health than vaccination. It's not mandatory in this country. There's no good recording of efficacy, how well they work, and adverse reactions, the bad things that come with them. So the main opinion was that in a case where two parents have differing views and they're separated, then the person with day-to-day care should make that decision, whichever one it is, whether it was to vaccinate or not vaccinate. Anyway, so they went on and started trying to defend me, and the case trundled on, and it trundled on for about 2 years until, and I carried on practicing in all this time. Nobody ever had any problem with my ability to practice. Then they saw the expert evidence from the General Medical Council's expert called Dr. David Ellerman, who was a consultant at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, the premier children's tertiary hospital in the UK. And they said in all the years that they had been defending doctors, they'd never seen a report by a doctor about one of their colleagues that was so disparaging and critical, and that as he was such an eminent person, the panel couldn't help being enormously impressed by him, and so they wouldn't fail to strike me off. However, they made a deal with the GMC, which was that if I agreed to all the charges, which I actually find, I normally when I'm giving a lecture, I have them in front of me. I think it's something Freudian, I can never quite remember what they are, but it was to do with coating selectively, giving misleading impressions of the evidence on efficacy, how well they work, and adverse reactions. But the worst criticism was that I had allowed my deeply held views on immunisation to override my duty to the court and the litigants to provide an independent, objective report. And therefore I was guilty of serious professional misconduct, and therefore I should be struck off. So I can't tell you how terrible it is, except I can, as a parent of a person who has had their symptoms associated with the MMR vaccine and having to bring them up. But I can't tell you from another point of view in life how terrible it is having something like this hanging over you. It disrupts you, your life, your health, your family, all those hours and hours and hours going through reams of papers trying to write these things, staying up all night, being sleep deprived. It's just horrendous. So it's actually very attractive for somebody to say we've made a deal. But even in that state, I said to them, look, I've already told you, always told you that my reputation is more important to me than my registration, because what's the point of being registered as a practicing doctor if they think you're that bonkers person who doesn't know what she's talking about? So I said I'd like a second opinion. So by now it was 2006, and 6 weeks before my case in December 2006, my whole legal team withdrew, and they left me with no lawyer and no barrister and nobody. In fact, they said to me, well, if instead of wanting to get on with your life, you want to stand on the table and bang your drum, that's up to you. So, I managed to find a lawyer called Mr. Clifford Miller, who is not a medical defence lawyer, he's a patents lawyer, but he's a bit like the eagle from high up, who sees the detail right down there on the ground that nobody else can see. And then thankfully my medical defence organisation agreed to pay for him. So he managed to get my case adjourned, he managed to get a QC called Ian Stern to take up my case, and then it got moved to first of all June and then August 2007. If people wonder why sometimes people don't say anything about any type of medical practice they're worried about, I should say to you that at the time I was home educating my 2 children. I'm a single parent. They were going through GCSEs, and I had to actually get a letter from the local authority to move the June date, to say I'd been in abdication of my duty as an educator to not be there while they were doing their GCSEs. They were saying, oh, well, they've done all the revision. They can just do the exams while you're not there. The other thing is the GMC is based in London. I lived in London, but they have offices in Manchester. So they moved me to Manchester for 3 weeks to have the case heard.
Why would they do that?
Why would they do that? I just know it made it a lot more difficult for me. Okay. I know also that if somebody took out the wrong kidney and somebody died, they'd hear their case in 2 or 3 days or maybe a week. But because I said that it's really the parent with care who ought to make the decision about something like vaccination, given that it's not mandatory, etc., they had me up there for three weeks. Anyway, so to cut a long story short, which is already quite a long story, at the end of the 3 weeks, and I still can't quite believe it, the panel, may God bless them, found that I hadn't failed to be independent, objective and unbiased in the testimony I gave the court. They said I had made some mistakes, but in the context of 4 experts, hundreds of scientific papers, I made fewer mistakes than everybody else, and everything I said was based on refereed medical journals. So I'm actually the only doctor in the UK whose opinion on vaccination has been tested in a 3-week UK statutory tribunal and found to be independent, objective and unbiased beyond any doubt, or in the new terminology, sure.
So, long and short, you did not lose your licence?
No, I still practice. They call it practicing because we don't really know what
Do
we're
they
doing.
try and keep you quiet though? Do they? You didn't get much press, was not?
Well, I got a lot of press when I first got accused. MMR doctor they called me, but it wasn't an MMR case, it was about all the vaccines. When I was completely exonerated, there was nothing at all. And in fact, the defence organisation said to me, because everything they do is actually discretionary, it's not like house insurance, it's discretionary whether they cover you, even though you pay your premiums, they said I should keep quiet. In case anything else came, or in case there was an appeal, because they thought there might be an appeal. So I had to keep quiet because the case cost over £100,000, not including things like my hotel fees for staying up in Manchester, or somebody to look after my children while I wasn't there. But yes, so I had to keep quiet because of that. So there was not a peep after that.
One of the things that we're seeing, travelling around America and Narvi, we are horrified. It's like night and day, clear as a whistle. The unvaccinated are super healthy, so unbelievably healthy,
yes,
and bright.
yes.
And they've got this beautiful look, and their families are very calm. And then we have the vaccinated families who are stressed out, tired, injured children, crying, huge emotion and pain that ripples around the siblings and everything. It's the same story everywhere we go.
Yes.
Why have we not got the independent vax versus unvax study? Because it would be game over if we had that.
Well, the argument is always it would not be ethical to withhold such a life-saving intervention from people. So, for example, when we had the problem with the wholesale whooping cough vaccine, in order to see if it was problematic, we compared people who'd had diphtheria, tetanus and wholesale whooping cough vaccine, the triple, against people who just had diphtheria and tetanus vaccine. But all of the vaccines had, in those days, mercury, and as now, aluminium and formaldehyde, so we're not doing the two. When we tested the meningococcal C vaccine, it was against people who'd had the hepatitis B vaccine, which was withdrawn in France because of worries about multiple sclerosis when given in the school child vaccination programme. Having said that, when you talk to vaccination experts and say to them, why don't we do these trials? Because in this country, in the UK, at least 5% of children are not vaccinated. And the birth rate is between 500 and 700,000 a year, so we'll make it 500,000 because it's easy for the maths. So that means 25,000 children a year are not vaccinated. So in 4 years that's 100,000, in 12 years that's 300,000. You couldn't do the gold standard, which is the double-blind randomised placebo-controlled trial, which we haven't done for any vaccines in any form apart from BCG anyway. But you could do case control ones where you control them for the mother's educational attainment, co-sleeping, smoking, where they live, the father's earning, the mother's earning and so on. We don't do them because people say, well, actually, a lot of the parents who don't vaccinate it are sort of, they're particular about their children's health. So if we compared them with vaccinated children, it wouldn't really be quite a completely fair comparison because obviously those children, would do better anyway. So this is where you find with the papers. When you find papers, you never read, you must only read the method and the results, and not what the conclusions are, because there's all sorts of nuggets you can find. So what they're saying in a backhanded way is that there are things you can do to disease-proof your children and make them have a better outcome with the disease. Because they're just saying they don't want to test the vaccine against these people because they'll have a better outcome anyway, so it won't make the vaccine look so effective. However, if you're worried about vaccination and you're worried about the disease and you go to your GP and say, look, I'm really worried about the vaccine, I'm really worried about the disease, is there anything else I can do to help disease-proof my child? They'll say, there's nothing. But we know there is, because that's why they don't do the comparisons.
We understand that they're introducing the Hep B to
Yes.
babies.
From the 1st of September, from children born from the 1st of August.
So in the UK they will have Hep B and meningitis B,
Mm-hmm.
and plus all the DTaP and all the other ones.
Yes.
I mean, we're hearing from SIDS deaths from parents following vaccines on a much smaller schedule than that.
Yes.
So how worried are you? There's going to be a load of dead babies.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just not worried anymore. I'm not worried about the dead babies, but in terms of what the schedule is, in a way, I can't do anything about that. That's not my worry. What I do, which is positive, is that I try and give people information. There's no point in worrying about things I can do nothing about. I'm not the government, I can't decide what the schedule is. What I can do is I can give information, I can give lectures, I can put information on my website and hope that people will educate themselves.
Okay, so where can they go to your website and educate
They just
themselves?
have to Google my name.
So guys, you know how to spell it?
Jayne, Donegan, Donegan.